It is one of the first rules we learn or should learn as kids. So pick up your things when you're finished with them. But for years, CPS Energy has not exactly been doing that. Our city-owned utility has failed to take down thousands now of old and deteriorating power poles that are no longer holding up any utility lines. News 4's Jaie Avila investigates why these dead poles have been left to clutter up our roadsides and our front yards in tonight's Troubleshooters investigation.
This is what we're talking about, old power poles with no utility lines on them. Eyesores that have accumulated because CPS Energy and the telecom companies haven't removed them. This one here is right in front of CPS Energy headquarters. Back in August, a subcontractor working for CPS Energy installed new utility poles along East Hildebrand and transferred the existing power lines onto them. But homeowners were concerned about the old poles they were replacing.
I said, wait a second, what's going to happen to these poles? I mean, this is a nice neighborhood. And they said they were going to leave them.
Homeowner Ronnie Gabriel was especially upset because that would have left his house with two dead poles in front of it. The pole that had just been replaced and a much older one that had been there for who knows how long.
There's vines growing on them, and they're not even being maintained. Now, whose job is that to maintain these poles?
The answer in this case is CPS Energy, although the utility says some of the dead poles around San Antonio belong to telecom companies like AT&T. If you look, you'll see them all over town, towering above our streets like huge, decaying fence posts. We went to CPS Energy to ask why this has been allowed to happen. Why not just remove them right when you're out there putting the new pole up?
That's a great question, and it's actually very difficult to do that, because if we put a new pole and if there's attachment from another utility out there, we can't remove their attachments.
By attachments, he means the other wires that are on the utility poles that belong to telephone and cable companies. CPS Energy says they have to leave the old poles up for 90 days, so those companies have a chance to move their lines over. Then they will go back and remove the dead poles.
But that obviously isn't happening in many cases. A lot of the dead poles around town have clearly been out here for years. Look at all the vines all over this one. And the most recent inspection tag says 2010.
We showed CPS Energy some examples. That's obviously been out there a lot longer than a couple of months.
Right.
How come there are so many old poles just sitting around town?
Yeah, again, if you drive around town, I wouldn't be surprised if you found hundreds, if not thousands of those poles. Unfortunately, it's not something that we get to as quickly as we would want.
Right.
Homeowner Ronnie Gabriel suspects the failure to remove so many poles comes back to money.
It costs them too much to remove it, so it's just cheaper once they transfer the lines, leave the old pole.
CPS Energy denies that and says a couple of years ago it designated an entire crew to do nothing but drive around removing dead poles.
This year alone, that crew will be pulling about 2,100 poles.
Ronnie Gabriel ended up cutting a deal with CPS Energy's subcontractor. He allowed the crew to cut some tree limbs on his property that were in their way, and in exchange, they immediately removed his two dead poles. The rest of the city will have to wait for that removal crew to cut through our utility pole backlog.